Welcome to the thisABILITY Adventures podcast. I'm Andrea Anderson.
And I'm Chip Dodd from Team thisABILITY.
Hey, hi, my name is Chip Dodd with Team thisABILITY, and this is the race Ramble for the recent Expedition Colorado adventure race that we just completed. With me, I have Andrea, my teammate who did the race with me, and a special guest, Doug Silk, who was amazing and did the commentary for us during the race on Facebook. And I know like many people appreciated his insights into the race and all of that. Andrea, you had a few things you wanted to say too.
Well, we met Doug probably a couple of years ago now at the C2C, right, Doug? That's where we met
2 years
first.
ago. Yep.
Yeah, and we're lucky to have him be able to follow along on the race. But unfortunately, it's largely because he's recovering from a surgery. And I just know, Doug, you've made a transition from triathlete to adventure racing. And I thought part of that was due to some changes in your body with your ankles. And I just really appreciate that you have kept going with bigger goals, even though you had a little bit of a setback. And, I just wanted to hear from you before we get started on our race. How's that going? And you're still shooting for adventure racing again, right? And I just want everyone to know that you don't have to be runners to be adventure racers. And I thought you might want to tell us a little bit about where you're coming from right now. And I'm really glad that you're able to do this and that you're feeling good and you came through the surgery good. But let's hear it from you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for letting me kind of be your dot watcher during the race. I wasn't sure kind of what to expect on my end since I had surgery literally that Wednesday and wasn't sure what my pain would be like, how the pain meds would be affecting my ability to do posts, but it actually gave me something to focus on in that first kind of 48 hours after the surgery to keep my mind off the pain. But I will say that I didn't do as much pre-race kind of looking at what you would be doing. Even when I looked at when they first posted all of the dots, I thought that you would be going into this really high section right off of the water. And I was just completely wrong. And I think that was a part of the meds. But you are correct. I came from the triathlon world. I did triathlon since 2010. I've done 5 full Ironmans and close to 30 half Ironmans. And then, getting older, I'm 47 this year, but 2 years ago, I had a third ankle surgery. And that one was to snip 2 tendons and a ligament and stretch them and kind of try to rebalance my foot. Unfortunately, that didn't take. And even over the last 2 years, I've known that with adventure racing, I'm not running, anything more than maybe 100 meters or so. And then really, careful footing in other places to try to avoid this as long as possible. But then I had the ankle fusion surgery last Wednesday, and hopefully now all of that pain is gone and it will give me that stability that I've been lacking for a long time. But yeah, you're right. With adventure racing, what I love about it, and my team name is Fear the Turtle, and I named it that because honestly, I'm not the fastest person, but you better watch out because we're going to be on your heels the whole time. And if you make bad choices with navigation or anything, really, I'm going to be right there. And so you better watch your back because we're coming for you. And so that's what, to me, AR gives you that ability to do. Like, if you're just trying to get into the sport, you don't have to go out and clear every course like you see thisABILITY and some of these other amazing teams doing. Like, go out, go get the adventure in the adventure racing, see what you can do, and figure out where you want to be. Not every team goes out to go compete for the win like you guys were doing in this race. And they go out to just go out and see what they can do and find their limits and then push past them. And that kind of brings me into you guys' race for this race, because Chip, I know you and I talked the week before the race, and you guys had some very different goals going into this expedition race than you've had in other expeditions. So tell me a little about that.
Yeah, I guess this has happened over quite a bit of time. It's like we're so much known for mid pack, especially in these big World Series expedition races. Like there's the caliber of athletes at the front line is just 10x what we're capable of. So usually we go into these races with the goal of, well, we want to see as much of the course as possible. We don't want to get short coursed. We don't want any injuries. And so we're kind of known. I think Jason Magnus said we're durable. We're known to be durable. We're carrying too much crap because we're scared something's going to happen, and we're not light and fast. And I guess this one especially, I think for me personally, it popped out where it's high altitude. We knew you have to get acclimated to it, and our normal teammate like Caitlin, she likes to fly in like 2 hours before the start, do the race, and then fly out before the awards ceremony. And that's not going to work in Colorado. That's just you're gonna die. You're gonna puke blood. You're gonna get HAPE or high altitude pulmonary edema. So for this race, it was like, Andrea, let's just do this one, just the two of us. And instead of just be durable, like let's go light and fast. Let's see what we can do, just us. And also, unfortunately, I wish AAR Georgia or Warrior would do this as an ARWS race, but because it was not an ARWS race. And we had two other amazing races. We had the Ozarks and we had Endless Mountains. A lot of teams can't do three to five of these things a year. So there weren't any top teams, meaning, the ones that you've heard, like Vitorade and all of these other teams that are world champions. None of those guys had signed up for this race. So we knew, like, okay, this is our chance. Like we can go from mid pack to just like, if any, like, just like what you just said, if anybody makes any errors, we're going to do pretty well in this race. Cause I know our nav is dialed, and Andrew and I did run a lot in this race. That's something different. Normally our teammates don't run a lot. So we're it slows us down a little bit, but this race, it's like it felt like all the downhills we were running, sometimes even the flats, depending on the urgency. And Andrea and I are also both really good bikers. So we were able to really hammer through some complicated trails and baby heads and stuff where normally we would have to have slowed down. So this race, this was probably the first team race where we both came in saying, let's hammer and go for the podium.
There were some formidable teams out there, though. So just because some of these guys aren't names you've heard of doesn't mean you shouldn't be afraid of them. I think even in the first, few legs, we were like, well, we might be between 5th and 10th place or something like that. Like we just didn't know where we were. And like everyone says, we just tried to focus on racing our own race. And at high altitude, there's no other way to race. I mean, there's just a limit to what your body will do, and everything feels a little bit more taxing than it does at other elevations.
Well, I know for me, obviously I'm going to be out on the course a lot longer than you guys at almost every race. So I have to carry more stuff. How did that feel for you guys changing and going? I mean, how ultralight did you go? I remember at C2C in 2022, the year that Hunter's team won, I saw them coming out of the transition, and Hunter looked like he had like, a kid's backpack on, and that was it. Is that what you guys were kind of in that mode?
So I need to be the one to answer this because I kind of felt myself roll my eyes when Chip said we were going to go light and fast because we did go fast for us, but I don't think it's possible for us to go light. I will say, though, that I carried less of my own stuff than ever. Usually I'm picking up other teammates' stuff here and there. This time I never had to carry anything for Chip. And most of the time he was carrying at least some of my mandatory gear. So I felt lighter, but by that same token, I was still wearing my larger out there pack, which is a little bit heavy itself, but I love how many pockets there are, and no, they weren't all filled up just because I have them. But it did allow for some space where you're not cramming stuff in. So that being said, I felt a little bit lighter, but I didn't feel hugely lighter. But I also feel like since I gave most of my mandatory stuff to Chip, he probably didn't feel that much lighter than he does anyway. However, he trains with the heaviest pack. So even if, I don't know, it's probably what your pack might have been at least 20 pounds, maybe even 25. And to you,
not
that might have
heavy.
felt lighter because you train with such a heavy pack. But anyway, I don't think we did go light. And we were pretty afraid of being cold this time. We had had a training thing ride that we did the day before the race started that we just froze. And so we thought, oh no, this was, good we had this training ride because we thought the weather could turn and we had extra layers. And so I don't feel like Chip was any lighter, and I feel like I was just a smidge lighter. But do you have anything else to say to that, Chip?
Yeah. Compared to my normal pack, I was very light. Like
Oh,
literally the entire race, I never once was like, oh, my pack's heavy. Why? When normally it's like, holy shit, my pack's got a lot of weight in it. A couple examples of how we lightened up. There's a lot of water on the course. There's snow at the top of the mountain. So almost every reentrant has snow melt, and there's no cattle or anything you're worried about, right? So I was able we could filter water along the way. So I'm not carrying 3 liters of water. Like in Florida sea to sea, like you don't want to filter this nasty muck. So like you're filling up at the TA with 3 liters. And yeah, you're not worried about the cold and all that stuff because you're in cell phone distance from 911. But in this race, it was like we went with minimal water. But like what Andrea was saying, we did go with the other gear, like the thermal gear, because unlike C2C or another race that's in a community, this is high altitude stuff. If anything goes wrong, especially at night on the ridgeline of a mountain, like we're doing these. But let me back up. The minimum we were in this race was like 9,300 feet, which was the paddle section. And from then we went up, and we spent a lot of time above the tree line. If you break an ankle or get pinned or can't move forward, you've got to have you have a proper thermal gear. This is not a race you go light on safety equipment. And so we did have, nothing crazy, but just, we had the normal thermal gear and real rain jackets and real rain pants, not the little ultra light stuff. But food choices and stuff like that. Luckily, with Warrior, they always have really good food at the TA, so you can eat a lot of food, and then you don't have to take as much food up with you. And so I had a lot less food on me than normal. But the really funny thing is, speaking of my pack weight, we get to the last thing. I know we should talk about this later, but basically, speaking of pack weight, we get to the finish line, and that last trek, I start shedding everything. So I'm like, we'll be back in 12 hours. It's the end of the race. So I'm just pulling all kinds of crap out of the pack, and I'm going ultra light this time. I get to the finish line with like a bottle of water, and my pack. And somebody like moved it and lifted it up to put it on the chair. It's like, God, your pack is heavy. I was like, there's nothing in it. But whatever.
And see, that's all perspective, right? I mean, like what Andrew was saying, you're saying it's a light pack, but for other people, that might be way more than what they're used to carrying. But that goes into training and kind of getting ready for this race. Obviously, when you go to C2C, you got to be ready for heat, and you got to figure out how to do that and how to manage that. But you don't really have to worry about hills. I mean, other than some sugar sand, and those, which, I have great experience with. But in this situation, I mean, you're literally just climbing almost the entire time. And you're at altitude. So how did you, for those like listening that are thinking about going to do a race in a place like this, what different did you have to do to get ready and, kind of acclimate prior to the race?
So we got there early. I think that's fairly critical. My family lives in Colorado, so we got to go, I think we were there 13 days ahead of time in the Denver area. Once we were there, we went up to altitude. We even went to Mount Evans, which is a 14,000 foot peak that you can actually drive to. And just a side note, that was just a really special experience for me because that's where my dad's ashes are. And my kids had never been up there, including my son with Down syndrome. And when he's gone to Colorado before, he had pneumonia one time. So it spooked me a lot that it was a little bit of a risk taking him up there that high. But we did, and he did fine. And that was a relief and such a great moment for me. I honestly don't think we would have done that if it weren't for the race. like sometimes things get away from you. I hadn't been up to that mountain probably in maybe even as much as 20 years. But anyway,
Wow.
we did spend a lot of time at altitude. We went up as high as we could. We came down to sleep. Then once my kids went back home, we went up to Breckenridge, or actually Leadville, and we stayed there. We did an active thing each day. We slept high. We were monitoring our pulse ox just to see what the environment was doing to us and if we were improving or not. Our watches also have a climatization number, like it tells you what you're acclimated to. So that was kind of fun to keep track of that. I think that was the biggest thing we did right, was to acclimatize as much as we could. Otherwise, we've just been racing a lot this year, and we've, over the races we've done, we've got a lot of hill training and all that sort of thing. But do you have anything to add to that, Chip?
Yeah, like you said, we were each day we're trying to get as high as we could. We did 414ers leading into the race, like just 3 days before the race or something like that, with Jeff and Hunter and Bruce,
just for fun.
And so we one time I climbed a glacier up above the tree line. It was just like spending as much time as possible. But the driving out here also, I was again, as you're driving, you're slowly acclimatizing, and so luckily we Andrew and I can both do our jobs from a cargo van, which is where I am now. I'm at my office in a cargo van at a state park. And so we could really take the time to come out. And I think a lot of teams didn't have that luxury. They've got the normal job with the cubicle and the family and the dogs, and they fly in for a race that's high altitude and they get whacked. And there's just nothing you can do about it. It may be, if you're going to come run a marathon, yeah, you can get off the airplane and do that because it's only 4 to 5, 6 hours. You can't do a 65, or I think we were out there for 64 hours. You can't do a race that long just getting off the airplane and go high. The other thing, I did take a lot of supplements. I asked ChatGPT, like, what supplements do I need to produce red blood cells at high altitude? And so I took like iron and phosphate or something. I don't know. I just had this like a range of meds I was taking just to make sure that my body had the nutrients it needed to produce lots of red blood cells quickly.
Of course, everything was over the counter for all of that. So just vitamins.
Well, and I was just going to say, I remember several years ago, I had an athlete that was going from altitude to a lower altitude to do a race. And so I started looking into altitude training and like what you need to do and how much time you need to acclimate. And like you were saying, for a marathon or a half Ironman or an Ironman distance race, like you're either good with going about a week ahead of time and letting your body get ready for that new altitude, or you show up like the day before and do it before your body has a chance to adjust, but then you're done. But in this case, you would have been 24 hours into the race and then feeling like crap.
Yeah.
Well,
a lot of teams ended up having.
Oh, I just wanted to say also that we weren't acclimatized to the full altitude that we were at. Well, according to our watches, we were somewhere around 8,500 acclimated to that. And, the race started even higher, but I'm sure we performed better because of that. But even folks coming from the Denver area, around 5,000 feet, all of us had issues with the altitude in some way, shape, or form. And the only thing you can really do is just slow down or even stop.
Yeah. So what can you do if you start feeling that? Like I've heard that, you don't want to sleep high. Like if you're going to sleep, you want to sleep low. But other than just slowing down and just taking your time, what else can you do?
It's slow down or go down. I think with HAPE, there's no magic thing. You just have to descend. If you're coughing blood and that type of thing, I don't think that there's anything you can do at altitude to repair that. And so that's where it's weird because in adventure racing, you're normally not having to deal with HAPE and things like that. But this literally, like Jeff wanted, this is like the highest race that's ever been done. And literally there was teams or members of teams that were dropping like flies. They couldn't go on. one of our good friends, Ron Eglin, I think he was having a heart palpitation or something going on with his heart, that anytime he got above 12,000 feet, it would start fluttering. And so his team just had to say, well, we're not going for the checkpoints above 12,000. Tomas Diaz, the guy that normally does our commentary and prior teammate and all of that, he was up there and for the first, he flew in and then did the race. For the first few days, I think they were saying he couldn't go above 11. He was getting better through the race, but he got wonky and he started to get confused. And so his team made the safety call just to say, we're going to go for the lower checkpoints. We're not getting up there on the ridgeline. And so these are just people that we know that shared their story, but other teams we know are just, people start puking, they can't eat, all kinds of bad things happen. You just either stay low or drop out,
The really cool thing about this race, as is cool for all of the warrior races we've done, is there are options. So just because you might have had a hard time with the points above 12,000 feet doesn't mean there's some lower lying fruit or some way to complete the course. So in that way, I really liked the design for everybody, because we were able to get them all, but those teams that Chip just mentioned, Type 2 Fun was Tomas's team and Florida Extreme was Ron Eglin's team. They both finished the race and they just managed their challenges as they came. And that's exactly what you want to be doing. And the course design itself had to be changed at the last minute. I guess there's some permitting issues in one particular county where they had just laid off a certain amount of emergency responders. And so they just said, sorry, you can't do the race. So last minute, several days before, they had to rearrange the course. And it was just a fabulous course. I wouldn't have known that they had to change anything. I loved it so much. And it still gave all of those teams that might have been struggling an option. And the teams, I hope all the teams realize that, but a lot of times if you just go down, you take a break, it's not the end of the world. So you're a couple hours behind where you thought you were, but you'll actually end up doing better than you thought. I think some of that reasoning comes with experience. And the teams that might not have had that experience of knowing that, nothing lasts forever, like everything's temporary. You might be throwing them now, but if you just give it six hours or whatever. When I was throwing my guts up in Lesotho and it was high altitude and whatever. And I learned the hard way too, that, you just got to wait it out. And so the more experience you have waiting things like that out, I think the better you do. And again, I guess my point there was just that it was great that the course was adaptable to a lot of different abilities.
Yeah, I tried to point out in the postings for you guys kind of what some of the decision-making things were, not just for you guys, because you guys were going for the win and the clear, but teams like Type 2 and Florida Extreme and some other teams that you could see that they were making strategic points that I thought were really smart. Like, don't go for these points that take, over 30 minutes out and 30 minutes back to go get 1 point. Because for me, like when I'm doing a race, that's just not worth it to me. I'm not going to clear a course like this. I'm not going to clear C to C. So it's about getting as many points as I still can, but making strategic decisions like that. And sometimes that's done on the fly. Like you have those options. Sometimes you can look at a course on the map and go, yep, we're just going to leave those out. I'm not even going to go near them. Or sometimes you have to go, look, I just threw up a little while ago. I can't get replenishment of food or water for a while. So let's just cut and go here and then we can figure it out. So it brings me to the first thing when I started watching your dot, and which was on the paddle section. And there were strategic decisions, right? You go counterclockwise or clockwise. You guys chose to go clockwise. I saw why you did that. And then as I started kind of seeing how things were playing out, I felt like, and I went and did the time comparisons later, but it seemed like the teams that went counterclockwise actually by about an average about 30 minutes. And that the teams that finished ahead of you on the paddle were all the teams that went counterclockwise. So how did you make that initial decision to go clockwise?
I'll throw out what I thought was I didn't want the sun in my eyes. And so I kind of went the direction that was away from the sun. I also, and I, I liked the idea of not going where everybody else went. So then you can kind of see the teams coming at you and all of that. It looked pretty straightforward. If you look at our track, it's kind of like straight lines going from this to this to this to this. So it didn't seem like there was a distance or there wasn't any hacks. We weren't allowed to portage and things like that. So pretty much for me, it was just, I just didn't want the, like, I figured once the sun's high, then you can go in any direction you want. It's not in your face. I didn't want to go like into the sun. That was my, so other than that, I don't know, Andrea, did you remember having any other strategy?
Well, there was no wind when it started. I mean, wind could always be a factor.
Yeah.
But the other factor is, and I'm not sure, but all those teams that went counterclockwise might just be better paddlers.
Well, yeah, I mean,
So it
you
might have
never know,
nothing to do
right?
with which way.
The way I looked at it also is I feel like I am not as strong later in the paddle as I am early on. And maybe going for distance between points early when you're stronger, that probably would have suited me a little bit better. And those first 3 points, those had the most distance between them.
Yeah.
And then the rest of them, it looked like they were shorter distances in between. Were any of those memorable points on the water? Any good stories?
There was one that, or let me go back to the boats too. We had a 2-person kayak, which was fairly short. Some of the teams, especially the 4-person teams, I think they had canoes. They had, like, Jeff brought a bunch of canoes out. And so anybody that was in the canoe would have gone faster than the kayak. It's just longer and thinner and better. And so like 3-person teams, there'd be 3 people in one canoe that's 7 foot or 17 feet. They would blow by us. And just for example, on Florida Extreme, they had 1 canoe and 1 kayak. And there's like no way that the kayak could keep up with the canoe. So it was you could just tell they just blew right by. So when it comes down to who was going the fastest on the paddle, you'd have to also take into consideration the boat. The one I guess that stands out to me, and I really appreciated it, he put a checkpoint on top of a mountain. I think maybe it was 400 or 500 feet off the water. So you actually had to like park your boat and bushwhack up to this mountaintop, which had a beautiful view. But it was I realized getting out of the boat, like, getting this checkpoint is going to be easy. Finding your boat after the checkpoint is going to be hard. And so we very much paid attention going up. And it was kind of a neat strategy thing. There was like a spur. And so you had kind of had a choice. Do you want a long, like, easy climb up, but it's long and it's bushwhacky? Or do you go on the side of the spur and have higher elevation, less distance? We kind of threaded the needle and went like halfway. We didn't want it too steep. We didn't want to go too long. And I think we picked a good thing, but we very much paid attention to where we were and the bearing that we were on and landmarks, whether it's a tree or a pile of logs. So we were able to go up and pop that point and come straight back to our boat with not flailing around. But I could imagine there's probably some teams out there wandering around trying to find their boat if they didn't know what they were doing. But
Yeah, no, I mean, all of that goes into strategy, right? Like, where do you pour it in? I remember there was a race that we did. It was the 50-hour race, and you could put in at this one point, or you could go around and put in a little later, and then there was like an old fire trail that like went straight up to the point, but you didn't know that because everybody else was putting in at this other spot, and it looked where you should probably put in for it on the map. So everybody ended up probably hiking an extra half mile just to get up there when you could have gone all the way around and then gone up this little fire road. And that's probably how they set the point.
right, yeah.
But you didn't know that till you got to the top and you look down and you're like, oh, I bet that goes right down to the water, and you could find it. So how did you guys feel coming off the water? I mean, having the goals that you had and knowing kind of where you were sitting and seeing all these teams in front of you off of the paddle, how did that make you feel?
So we pretty much knew we were not going to be in the front to start with, mostly because it started with the paddle, which we're not great at. But also just because we knew we were probably going to be pretty good at managing our effort, and we thought that would pay off as the race progressed. So, we did a really manageable but fast pace for us, and just had to keep the faith. that was going to sustain us and help us pass people, which we did. So that was pretty exciting and different than a lot of races. You know, like you said, usually a lot of the strategy is in which points to go get, like which ones are too far away to make it worth your while. And having the mindset that we're going to clear this course was really different for us. So it kind of took a lot of that strategy stress away. You know, we knew people were in front of us, but we also knew we're not going to change anything we're doing in order to get them or not get them. You know, we're just going to stay the course. And that's a really pretty fun way to race. I don't know that we'll get to race that way very often. You know, it's a rare race that we think, oh, we're going to clear this thing. So this was one of the times, you know, I say that we're a team that's really kind of flexible in our goals. Maybe some people would think we're almost too flexible because, you know, if you don't have a strong enough goal, then you're kind of throwing things away right and left. But it was just really pretty neat to be ahead of ourselves. You know, we're not usually saying, oh, we gained a couple of hours on our logistics chart. Like that is really cool. Makes me want to do that again.
I was looking at at the chart that you had given me of your pre-race estimates. And I was like, man, they've got to feel really good about where they are onto the bike right now, because you were about 2 hours ahead of the estimates that you had. And I was like, all right, they've got to be feeling good, but also you're not sure who your competition is at that point, because there were teams that were ahead of you that might not stay that way because they might drop points later. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess that all goes, but you saying that nothing was going to change because you knew what you were going to try to accomplish anyway. And if it was able to clear, then you could make those changes on the last leg. But probably going into that, you weren't going to even think about dropping.
Exactly.
Nope.
Yeah.
That was what kind of it. Jeff made it clear to the teams in the race brief, I think, that the course was clearable. It because of the altitude, he did not. I think he even said it. It was like it's this, because I think C2C 74 hours, and I think they gave us even more. But he knew we were putting less points and less distance in the C2C. But he made it clear, you know, don't skip anything. Like if nothing happens, your guys are going to clear this course. And so it took away, like Doug, you were talking about C2C. We've never cleared a C2C, even though we were going fast. And so you kind of start off looking at these points of like minutes per checkpoint, kind of like you said. If you see it, like that's going to be an hour and a half for that one point. That doesn't make any sense. This one, we didn't have a choice. It was, we have to clear it. It doesn't matter if there's storms and hail, which we can get into that. It was like, we just have to wait it out because we have to get the checkpoint. There is no skipping. And that was a different strategy for us.
Like watching Hunter's pre-race videos, and he's talking about, oh yeah, I'm hiking up here. It's a clear blue afternoon. And then he's like at the top of the ridge and this hailstorm blows in and he's got like a river of water underneath him. That has to go into your head, like thinking this is probably what's going to happen every afternoon during the race. But I mean, you guys were prepared physically and equipment wise. So it's just, I think that puts you probably a leg ahead of a lot of other teams that maybe this was their first expedition. They didn't have those kind of the mental bank that you guys have of suffering. Yeah, because I mean, you guys you've done a lot of really tough races. I mean, the one race where you guys had, it was like an 80-hour bike leg. I mean, that blows my mind.
Yeah. Paraguay, I think the Trek section, the first leg took us like 78 hours. The whole C2C on foot. Right. And you're by yourself, like you're in the middle of Paraguay. There's no Walmarts and all this other. So we're used to that. And that's one of the things I think that Andrew and I both, we knew going into this race, we're up against people that are, I mean, a lot of the people were from Colorado or the surrounding areas. They're high altitude. They know the mountains. They maybe even have local knowledge. But what we knew just looking at the names, because we didn't recognize them, these were not expedition racers. This is they may have done a race, but they haven't done a lot of races because we recognize their name or their team name. And so what typically happens in these expeditions, people go out of the gate hot and like, oh, run, 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 and they kill themselves. And then more experienced teams, they go, no, we're going to go our pace, which is sustainable. Brian Gayton said, fear of the turtle, exactly. Brian Gayton's like in, especially Ecuador, he was saying this is a race of attrition. It's don't break stuff, don't break people, don't break down, keep your nutrition dialed, keep your sleep dialed, and you'll do fine. The inexperienced teams go out and then 48 hours into the race and they go off the rails because they're not sleeping, they're not eating, they went too fast, they got injuries, the altitude's catching up with them. And we just need to wait them out. And and as you saw, we started off in the back and we're just picking off teams one by one as we go forward, which had to be exciting from a dot watching standpoint of holy crap, they're moving up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm watching you go through that first bike section, and you're making moves to get to the front of the pack, I started to be able to see who the front running teams were. And I think at that point, you and Boo Boo took different routes between, I think it was checkpoint 14 and 15, like 14, 15, 16, where you guys went down to a road, which to me is always going to be faster than staying on single track. And how much of this was single track? I know you were looking forward to the single track. That's a strength of you guys. How much of that first bike section was single track?
A lot.
What do you think? About half? Yeah, it was a lot. And that was one thing Jeff said when the course change occurred. He said, you guys are going to spend a lot more time on the bike than you would have in the original course. And we're like, yay.
Specifically single track.
Yeah.
He said specifically single track, not just on the bike. But yeah,
so
we were on single track quite a lot. And that decision of going to a road, I think you had said, Doug, that it may or may not have paid off. It was probably one half dozen of the other. But it is funny. Like there was times when we caught up with the team. I don't remember which one it was, but we had taken a trail or a road that they hadn't seen, and we pointed it out, and they're like, "Oh, that's how you got here faster." And then just a couple of points later, we took a path that they had seen, but we didn't, and it was a road versus trail situation, and it worked for us one time, and then we didn't see it the next time. So
I said like time, it was probably like a zero net gain. But effort could have been a huge difference, right? Like effort for that same amount of time on single track is very different than riding on a road at that same amount of time.
Yeah.
So, you're always trying to bank some sort of advantage, whether it's physical or time. And, so I saw what you were doing immediately, and I was wondering how it was going to pay out. So I was like kind of watching it to see.
So
this is further on in the race, but there was a time in the final bike leg where we had the choice of road or trail, and we crossed paths with Boo Boo, and we both stopped and we had a discussion about, what each of us were doing. And then, we realized who they were. And then when they asked us our team name, they're like, "Oh, you're in second place. You're the ones that are trying to catch us." Like, yeah, that is us. And they said, and that they figured that out after they had told us, "Well, yeah, we just took the single track down because it was so much fun. You should do it too." And we're thinking, yeah, I bet that would be a lot more fun. But now that we know where you are, we are definitely taking the road.
We're going fast. Yeah. It was really funny. They had no idea who we were, and they had heard that thisABILITY's after you, but you can't see our logo because of the
because your packs and the bibs and everything.
The bib, yeah, you can't tell. And we just look like two old people riding bikes and having fun and smiling, and they didn't realize we're actually formidable. Yeah.
So we had gone a different route.
It's different than a race here or like C2C where you get a lot of the same people that are doing it, right? Like East Coast races, Virginia races. I mean, we get a lot of the same people, and that's what I love about this community is we get to see a lot of the same people. So when you're on the trail, it gives you that kind of adrenaline boost to see friends out on the course. But there, you didn't really know a lot of people. I mean, like you had Tomas's team, you had the Florida Extreme, but I think I only knew like maybe two other names in the entire race.
Yeah.
Amber, I think, was there racing.
Bolliard
She
was
was one.
there.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were a few, but how was that different? Like going into this race where everybody around here knows this ability and they know what trouble you are, but there they they didn't know that, and that's funny that they were that late in the race and they're like, "Oh, you're the ones that are trying to catch us."
Yeah. Well, one thing you guys know, like I love to talk and create the community and all of that. So leading into the race, we set up a Facebook group and started to do dinners together and exercise together. And so we were able to meet some of the people that we normally wouldn't know. But again, like the top the boo boo guys, they never came to one of our events, so we didn't get to meet them. But the cool thing is, like normal AR, it doesn't matter. Like you cross a team on the trail, you say hi, you talk. It doesn't matter if they're competitive or not. We just stopped, and so we got to know people as we went through the race. Um, and so so it was a lot. It was very different, but still, you had, I also the NCARS guys were out here from North Carolina, so we saw a lot of people that we knew. I was actually surprised how many people came out to do the race.
It's shared trauma, right? Like
Yeah,
you build the strongest relationships over shared trauma. And adventure race is nothing but hours and hours of trauma. So
totally.
Also, though, you ask the question kind of as if we're the ones that are intimidating to people. Whereas to me, I show up at a race and it doesn't matter if I know them or not. I look around and I'm instantly scared. It's like, wow, look at
and
all
see,
these
that's
athletes. And then I
and
have
I
to
think that's where
remind myself,
you don't
yeah,
give
I don't
yourself the
know.
credit that you have earned, which I think, you guys as a team have established yourself. And I think that is something that people respect. And then I think also your humbleness. The first year that I did C2C, I remember we were on this night two, we were on the Santos Trail, and it was like 3 a.m. And my two teammates were zombies at this point, and we were looking for this point in this really thick area off the Santos Trail, and we ended up being in the wrong area and never found it. But we came across this other team, and I didn't know who they were, had never seen them, obviously. And I was like, "Hey, did you guys see it?" And they just like ignored us
Wow.
and like kept going. And I was like, "This is so not what I'm used to in this, in this community." And it's what I told my guys, like going into C2C. I go, "Look, I don't care where we finish, but I want when people run across Fear the Turtle that they're like, dude, those guys were awesome." And like,
Yeah.
doesn't matter where you finish. Just, I want you to think, man, those guys cracked a joke. They, did something. And you guys are like that too. Like every single picture is you smiling.
Yeah.
Which that's the epitome of your team and you guys. And that's why it was kind of my honor to be able to do the dot watching and do the posting for you, because you want to grow the community just like I want to grow the community. And I think that's what makes this community strong. And being able to dot watch and get more people interested that aren't even there, is something that is, it hits me in the heart because I this is kind of prolonged my athletic career.
Yep.
I don't want to admit that I'm getting older, so I love the fact that I'm able to do this, and you guys do it to the point where when people see you at races here, they're like, "Oh, great, we're not winning." Like, so just
Right.
know that. So just know that.
Uh,
Um,
yeah, the World
so,
Series races, no, we're nowhere near it. But
but
local
honestly, though,
races,
like
it's like
people
beware.
watch you go to the World Series races and know that you're going to be competitive, though. Like you're not going to compete for the top spots, but that you're not, like, if something happens where like your dot starts to not track where people think it is, they automatically know that there's something wrong,
Right.
because you guys are just super consistent, and you showed that in this race too. Like I was looking at your estimates and then looking at where you were coming in, and after you finished that first bike leg, you were easily 5 hours ahead of where you thought you were going to be.
Yep.
How did that play into your sleep strategy before that first trek? Because I know in the initial estimate you had like a half hour kind of cat nap maybe, um, and then as you came back and I saw how much you were ahead of your time, I thought they're probably not going to sleep till TA3, because I thought you might do that bike before, because it was like a 7 mile bike, before you took your first sleep. But then you end up sleeping, I think after the second, you slept at TA2. Is that
So
right?
we tried to sleep at TA2.
Okay.
And I'll say, I just feel like I said earlier, the whole race was a little bit more taxing than you'd think. 26-mile trek, big whoop. Well, with the elevation and the altitude, it was a big deal. And we did try to sleep, and that was dumb because it was windy. Well, actually, here's the full long story. The TA itself in Alma's a really small town. It's the highest town in the US, municipality, the
So
highest
it,
post office, but
the
they
highest
had
pot dispensary, like they had that out front. Yeah, in the country.
Was that a
and
mandatory CP?
It should have been.
no, but in this small town of Alma, right where the TA was a skate park. So in this skate park had some ramps, and one of the ramps had like a cubby underneath of it with a door that was kind of like just a little closet. So, we kind of looked around, no skateboarders are there. We asked the volunteers, have you seen any skateboarders today? Because this looks perfect. We're going to go duck in this little closet to get out of the wind, and we're going to sleep there. So we think we've got it all figured out. And this race, they had sleep cards. So we had a 2-hour sleep card that we had to play at a TA. So we're thinking, okay, we'll just knock this out so that we don't have to worry about it later. We hand over our sleep card, and I go over to the little cubby place. I kind of sweep it out a little bit, get my stuff laid out. And just sure enough, one lone skateboarder comes. Like, oh, what the luck. So we moved our stuff over onto this other platform that had a picnic table and whatever, but it was on a platform. And although there was nowhere to escape the wind other than that little skateboard cubby, and we laid there maybe 15 minutes and decided to give up. But we still had to wait out our 2 hours that
Oh, you couldn't take it back and use it later?
actually we could have. I forgot that we could have, but we were so close to using it all up anyway that we waited it out and we left. So we didn't get sleep there. We biked on. We then did the next trek, right? Which
No,
was
you did.
amazing. It
Yeah,
was
you did
only
a short bike, I think, to a trek. And
Yeah.
then the trek was in that bowl with the waterfalls.
yes,
Yeah,
amazing.
it was a very hard trek.
Oh, it was hard, but it was amazing. I mean, I don't know if we've said it yet, but every single leg of this race had a beautiful view. I think it was probably the prettiest race we've ever done. There
Wow.
was always a view. So that was no exception. That was definitely a highlight. And as far as the design went, the first trek was up to Mosquito Pass, which, when you clamber up there, you get to the top of the saddle, and then you get to see over the saddle, and you get this 360 panoramic view. So that was the trek one. And it seemed like the treks built from there. So the next trek was, like you said, in the Alpine Lakes with the waterfalls. Amazing. And then that last trek that went up from Breckenridge up to the ridge along
You did
the
two
ridge
peaks
line.
up there, right? Like peak 5 and 6.
Yes, and we need to talk a little bit more about that too, because of the weather mostly. But anyway, those 3 treks they built on themselves, and they were just stunning. But after that 11-mile trek, we needed sleep. And talking about luck, we realized we needed sleep. There was nowhere to sleep. It was cold. It was windy. It was this. It was that. And then just when we were about ready to leave, the Florida Extreme came out of the tent they were using and said,
Nice.
it's free. And we're like, we're in. So we got a really good solid 2.5 hours of sleep there. And that set us up for the rest of the race. But that was a little bit of luck. And
Did you know at that point how close Cosmic was to you guys? And like, had you seen them on the race at all?
Yeah, we did see him. That section was one of the sections with a lot more strategy than the others. Sometimes just you just go from point to point to point, and there's no strategy. That one was that trek, the one with the waterfalls. There was 3 points out at the very end. It was 30 through 32, And
Yep.
as we were going up there, like we saw the Boo Boo. I'm sorry, let me back up. At the TA, one of the volunteers was like, yeah, people are having a lot of problem with 32 and it's dangerous or yada yada and whatever. And so we were thinking, do we go clockwise or counterclockwise? But we decided to do it as a lollipop and not go
Yep.
out and back, right? But everybody had a different strategy. It was really neat. Like we talked to the Boo Boo guys and they looked at my map and were like, yeah, that's what we did too. Good strategy, do the loop. But he said, yeah, it's a little bit sketchy, but it's not as bad as the volunteers were telling you. And we stopped. We saw Mark Bolliard. I think he was doing out and backs to do it. Some teams did two and then came down and went up and back. It was really neat. And I'm sure it'd be fun dot watching to see who cleared that in the least amount of time. I really liked our
the bad part
strategy.
about dot watching in that section was it was not a good satellite area. And so your satellites were not transmitting for a long period of time. But at one point, I noticed that you guys went from 31 to 32 over or stayed up on the high point
Yep.
and then attacked it. But Cosmic went down to 33 and then came up and back. And
Right.
I think that cost them an hour.
Yep. I think it
That
probably
was
did.
yeah.
Because it looked really hard on the map. But when you go from the one in the middle, I guess it would have been 31. Yeah, there is that it? Yeah. The
Yeah, so
elevation changed to go up and over the mountain. I think it was only 400 or 500 feet. Meanwhile, you had to like down 1,000 and back up 1,000 to do the out and back. But this was big country navigation. This was not. I mean, it's like the features were so large. It was really hard to like figure out where you are. And so we were using the kind of like triangulating off the peaks and using the massive features to really navigate through it. And I really felt like we did well. Yeah, what Andrea's got on there, you can tell we traversed from the lake. We had to go down. You couldn't go straight across like the green line shows because it was way too steep. The top of the lines got where it was, there was consequences if you fell. So we went down a little bit and then back up. But yeah, that up and over, I think, was a really good strategy move for us.
Yeah, I think that gained you an hour on Cosmic because at that point you guys were really close with them. Like in the standings, you were going back and forth, and I was like, "Oh, this is a dogfight because sleep's going to come into play." Because at that point, I thought you had already banked a couple of hours of sleep. So
Right.
then I thought you would be even further ahead. And then when I saw that you were sleeping again at TA3, because you were there for a good long while, I was like, well, maybe they're just banking more sleep because they know then they're going to push to the end. And then I saw Boo Boo did the same thing. Or no, sorry, not Boo Boo, but Cosmic. They slept at TA3 as well. And so I can imagine at that point you guys are just beat down from having two, really big treks up and down. I mean, you've been mountain biking like crazy, and then you still have a 40-mile bike and a 26-mile trek at the end.
Right.
And you wanted to bank the sleep then so that you could push, I thought, in watching you, so you could push hard till the end.
Yeah. And like you said, those two treks were back to back. I mean, the bike going from the one trek to the other, I think it took us 35 minutes. It was just
Yeah.
to get up to the reservoir. There was one checkpoint. It was all roads pretty much. They're dirt roads. So it was, you're on your feet a massive amount of time. But the other thing we did, I think I mentioned it earlier, but Andrew and I were like, we wanted to run the downhills, and I think that's another thing that we had done. We felt strong, and we trail run on a regular basis with a weighted pack, and and whether it's biking or trekking, even if it's not single track, it's like baby head Jeep trails. So you've got to be super spry where you're like, running on wonky terrain and you're tripping and falling and you're just going. And a lot of people don't train on wonky terrain. So they maybe they do a treadmill or they run around their neighborhood and they can't move through the boulder field quick. But Andrew and I had trained a lot on that, and we were able to move a lot quicker than our team normally moves.
Yeah, there was a picture of you guys coming down this looked like a pretty decent road with all the rocks, and I'm like, my ankles were like screaming at me just watching that. So, but that makes a big advantage for you guys,
Yep.
where you can move quickly, through that.
So
And that photo we were running.
part where
We ran all from Mosquito Pass all the way down. We ran and we went right past Cosmic, and they were like, holy crap, we are not going to run down that.
So I want to say something about that, though, technically speaking, because it's not something we get a chance to do all the time in our backyard. We live in Virginia, so we don't have that steep terrain with those baby heads and stuff. But it's one of those skills that I feel like we just kept getting better and better through the race. You know, there's a lot of races where you have to do something so much that you are going to get better at it because you just have to do it so much. And at that point, you know, rock hopping just got easier and easier. And it got to the point where it's the same idea with mountain biking, where if you're looking where you want to go, you're likely not going to make any errors. You know, it's like your brain just does it for your body, kind of goes on autopilot, and you just go. And the rock hopping started to feel that way for me too, which good thing, because there was you know, all throughout, but coming off of that last trek, it was all the way up to the ridge line, and there were basically at that elevation, it's just all rocky, bouldery stuff. There's not much grass or anything. And to come off that peak, you had to come down a scree field. Well, it wasn't too much scree. It was boulders, all different sizes. It never got to scree because scree is, you know, a little bit smaller and you'll slide down. But it was a long portion of really rocky terrain to get off that ridge line. And I was really glad we'd had the practice leading up to that. We actually did that pretty quickly. And I often had the thought, like, I couldn't be too careful, because kind of when you focus in too close, it would just throw you off. You just kind of had to go with the flow. And it's a really cool feeling. Yeah.
So then you guys got some good sleep after that section. And then how did that set you up going into the last long bike section? Because it looks like Boo Boo didn't sleep at TA3. They went to TA4 first and slept, and then they went back out and got some bike points first, which I thought might be to their detriment, because you don't know where you guys are at that point. And at that point, did they know that you were the ones chasing them? And I mean, I thought immediately, like, I thought that the guy that was leading, I can't remember his name, that ended up having to pull out. I thought that those guys had an insurmountable lead at that point. Because 5 or 6 hours in an adventure race, barring a mistake or a medical or something like that, is probably insurmountable at that point. Like, because you're not going to have a strategy decision that's going to change that. But were you guys pushing hard on that last bike to get to the last trek, knowing kind of where you stood?
I mean, I think we never let up. We were thinking, right, again, we were, like you said, like, we knew the other guys are younger and stronger, and they're from high altitude. I mean, these guys are rescue dudes. They're happy places above the tree line. They lead, like, I think our Antarctica, one guy guides at Antarctica. It's like, these guys are good. But the thing is, they're not expedition racers. So maybe, you know, they're going to go off the rails with sleep. And remember, the first guy, I think it was Eric Hopkins, like, he was crushing the course, but he didn't have the experience of how to manage sleep, and went completely off the rails and dropped out. And so we were kind of hoping maybe Boo Boo would do the same thing. Yeah, they're strong and fast, but if they made a bad decision on sleep, you know, maybe they do make an error. So I think they pushed it too far, and which we almost did. Went out there on the bike and was wonky, and they couldn't figure out what to do, and they had to go back to the TA, get sleep, and then go back out on the bike. So there was an inefficiency there. They had to go to a TA and leave when they didn't really need. I mean, you know, it was an emergency kind of thing. But we were right there.
Yeah, but I mean, that was smart, because that saved their race. I mean, that was the difference in them winning or bonking, right?
Correct.
So good on them to be able to make that decision, because, you know, poor Eric, when I started seeing him not go up to the main ridge line, I was like, what is going on? And then when I saw Jeff's explanation of what happened, I was like, wow. Like, I think we've all been in those, like, sleep monster moments where you're like, are we going in the right direction? But when you're solo, there's nobody there to correct you. There's no one there to say, dude, we've been on the wrong path for, 10 minutes now. This doesn't look right. and you have to be a lot more careful when you're going solo than you do when you're in a team, because there's nobody to bail you out. Like, if what would have happened to me at C2C, if I was by myself, who knows what would have happened? I mean, I was face down in the sugar stand, and luckily Scott was there to kind of wake me up and slap me awake. And I was like, why is this guy slapping me? But I was glad that he slapped me awake, because I mean, who knows how long I would have laid there. Good on him for making it back. It sucks to have your race day end that way. Trust me, I know. But you live to fight another day, and it sounds like he is going to be a really good adventure racer. Judging from what we got to see for the 40 hours that he was out there or whatever.
Yeah, he just needs the experience. He's got the physicality. He was fast on the mountain bike, fast on foot, smart on nav, and it was just a matter. He just didn't have the experience of what it's like to be out there for more than 48 hours and have to sleep and all that, and sleep monsters. We almost went off the rails though. Literally, we were like, what do we do? There's nowhere. It's windy. It's cold. We already tried that. It didn't work. And we're looking at the maps. If we get on the bikes and go, we leave from that reservoir and go up and over a pass. So we're going high altitude. And then it's all roads down to Breck. It was just like, what are we going to do? Like, we're going to have to find an abandoned shelter or mine or something. And then that's when FLX came out and was like, hey, you can use the tent now. We're done with it. And we're like, yes. And it made me think.
That's what you need to master. You need to master the side of the road nap like I do. Scott will tell you, like at C2C, I mean, it's like 2:00 in the afternoon, and I'm like, dude, I need 20 minutes. And we pulled over against the fence line on the side of the road and just took a nap. And I know you guys probably do that when you're at your limit, but having that tent there and being able to get good sleep, it's a game changer. I mean, I remember talking to Hunter about their 2022 win at C2C, and he was talking about how he was able to let his two teammates sleep while he went out and got those optional foot checkpoints. And then he came back and slept. So he did the longer section, and then they did the shorter section, but they were able to bank a good solid 3 hours of sleep. And then he nabbed that guy who slept, nabbed the whole rest of the way. And that made their race for them, because you're able to bank that mental time and physical time. So
yeah, often warrior races have a relay in the middle somewhere. This race did not have an O relay, so there was no splitting up of the team. But I was going to say about Eric Hopkins, he was so far ahead that he never had any teams coming by. So what we ran across Troy Couture. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right, but his two teammates had dropped and he was going on by himself. And we came across him on the final trek after the big ridge line. And it seemed to be really good timing, because he was a little bit disoriented. We all kind of got our bearings together, and it was just good timing, I think, that he came across people. And if Eric had been a little bit slower, he might have come across people, and that could have saved his race for him. But it was great to have Troy along with us. Once we caught up with him, he was kind of like, well, hey, do you mind if I stick with you guys through the night? And we're like, oh, no problem. We're trying to push hard, and it looks like you are too. And so we took off from that juncture together and kept a good pace together. It was pretty good timing for us too, because it just added a little bit of energy. We know each other so well that we don't have to talk too much. And, it might have gotten to a point in the race where it could have, slowed us down a lot, that we didn't have any external energy coming into the team. So right about then is when we came across Troy, and we just all seemed to keep going the same pace to the end. So that's a different end result for a soloist. A lot of times soloists will find a team that they can join forces with.
Yeah, I love that about adventure racing too. I mean, at the 50-hour race that we just did, halfway through the race, my teammate and I met up with the 3-girl team, and they stayed with us for the whole rest of the race. And then we picked up another 2-man team, and so we were in a pack of 7. And I mean, we just had a great time together. And you talk about that energy and that pick me up of knowing that you have other people that are bouncing things off of, and just having conversations that, keep you going to the next checkpoint. You guys have trained together and raced together a lot. So I would imagine that the conversations are not as flowing, between, especially when you're pushing that hard, because it's harder to breathe and talk. So that I'm sure that lifted your spirits to be able to have somebody to talk to and to keep you going. So as much as you were helping him, he was probably helping you.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
The other thing,
So you guys got caught on the ridge line, right?
yeah, we should back up a little bit. Let's rewind the clock to the sleep, because there's one more thing that I thought was profound. On the bike, when you come up against an incline, it's like the more and more tired we got, both mentally and physically, the quicker you would jump off the bike and push it up the hill, right? It's like you just look at it and you go, okay, granny gear, screw it. Now you get off and you push. Man, coming off of that sleep, and maybe we laid down for 3 hours, got 2.5 hours of sleep. All of a sudden, like, we had power again. Like, the amount of repair that our legs did, I thought was profound. Like, we were like, whoa, we can actually go up granny gear again. Like, my power's back. And so I think that's that's what the teams that try to.
I get what you're saying though, and I have heard that the sweet spot for sleeping is 90 minutes. And like, if you really want to get a repairing, like REM sleep, 90 minutes is at least what you need to do. That if you can take those little 30-minute, 20-minute cat naps all day long to get you to the next point. But if you want a repairing sleep that kind of builds you back up, you have to do at least 90 minutes. So getting that 2.5 hours, you probably got a whole hour of REM sleep in there. And that's where your body repairs itself the most.
Yeah, I think if we could rewind, I would do 2 hours per night. I'm sorry, there's 2 hours where you have 15 minutes laying down and getting up, meaning a 90-minute sleep cycle of actual sleep.
Yeah.
So I kind of wish we had done our plan where we had like 2 and 2 instead of like a 15-minute crap. I think we laid down for 45 minutes in Alma and only got about 15 asleep, and then the 3. That was not ideal, but again, I think after learning how valuable that tent was, we'll probably start taking a tent with us in races, meaning in the gear bin, so that we can get away from the TA, away from the noise, get in the tent, and then we're not worried about the wind and all of that. The other thing is a noise-making device. The tent was right next to a causeway where water was coming through, and so we had the background noise of the water, and then we couldn't hear all the noise at the TA because we had this background noise. So I'm thinking, like, we need a little battery-powered noisemaker that just in addition, because that was just such good sleep.
Having 2 young kids, I sleep with a sound machine, and like, it's really hard to sleep without a sound machine. But for Endless, I actually bought our team all these little face masks. So when you're in TA, no matter what time it is, you had something comfortable and light that you can just throw on and get it dark. So even if it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's nighttime when you put that on. But the sound machine is a great choice, especially like Jeff's TAs are legendary, right? I mean, the food's amazing. The volunteers are amazing, and
music,
but they're loud. Usually he likes music.
There's usually bumping music.
Getting sleep in a TA is a lot more difficult, or you have to go 100 yards away and find a quiet place. But yeah, if you have a tent and a little portable sound machine, you could probably sleep wherever you want. I would anyway.
In addition to that, what you were saying with the eye mask, I completely agree. We also do earplugs, and you got to get ones that are small enough that you can lay on your side of your head without them sticking out. And then the other thing is the congestion. Especially at the high altitude, it seemed like we're constantly congested. It's just like, it's like half the time you blow your nose and blood comes out a little bit. It's like it's just gross, but it's like your sinuses are dry and it's just bad. And so we also used Afrin. So like basically your sleep kit is like, get uncongested. You took a melatonin, right? You take melatonin, and that kind of tells your body it's dark, you need to go to bed. It's not like the sleeping pill. It's a natural whatever bang. So we do the melatonin, the Afrin, the eyes, the ears, and then try to be warm without wind. And that's kind of, and we do have a sleep pad. So you're not directly on the ground where it's cold or whatever. And that seems to get us by.
It's good.
Oh,
So you guys
okay.
got some really good sleep and got into the last bike. And Andrea, is that where you had your mishap?
Yeah, we could call it a mishap. So between points 39 and 40, it was like a double track dirt road, mostly hard packed and manageable until the very end. And it just came around a left-hand turn and it got suddenly steeper. And it was like one of those roads where it was a sudden steepness and then water runoff and then another steepness. So it's kind of like just it had different levels to it. The very first level, like it surprised me when I came around the corner. So I didn't react the way I should have. And like I already said, you always want to look where you want to go. I didn't. I just kind of looked at like, what am I going to do because I can't slow myself down. And this road was like just definitely dirt, loose, rocky, just slide. You just needed a controlled slide is what the proper technique was. That was not my technique. I kind of goosed one of the brakes a little bit too much. I was lucky I didn't go over the bars. I kind of slid to the side, but when I did that, my knee hit, my mat board hit a stump, broke off the compass, and then my face hit the stump. And it was really shocking to me. Usually my falls, like I'm kind of expecting them. They're often like in slow motion. And I'm like, oh, I'm falling. And, I've fallen a lot. If you've ridden a mountain bike long enough, you've fallen 10,000 times. And that's the only way you get better, or it's one of the best ways to get better. So I fell, I banged my mouth and I was just kind of stunned and not being able to see what happened. Like I knew I was bleeding a little bit and I just, of course, think the worst. So Chip is already down a ways. I yell stop and he's there waiting for me. And I did get up and I, took a second as I'm going down the hill to catch where he is walking my bike. I fall again because even walking, it's so slick. So I fell on my butt. And anyway, I got down to him and he kind of checked me out and I cleaned it up a little bit and put on some antibiotic cream with pain reliever and all was better. And of course, you always think, well, what could have happened? I mean, who hits their mouth and nothing else, And my
Right.
teeth were fine. My helmet, part of the brim was kind of knocked off, but not broken. So it was a fortunate fall, it really in hindsight wasn't that big a deal. It just kind of stunned me. And I was really glad it was close to the end of the race and the end of the bike leg because it did spook me just a little bit. But again, I wish I had just been
those are hard to
looking
kind
where
of
I wanted
recover
to
from.
go. Say that again?
Yeah, any kind of wreck, it makes you a lot more tentative
Yeah.
on the bike, and especially in the terrain that you guys were on, which is a lot more rocky, technical stuff. So I don't think anybody would blame you for being a little more tentative after just hitting your face on a stump. But that's awesome that you were able to keep going and get it cleaned up. And, other than some cosmetic issues, not affecting your race at all.
Yeah.
No.
I look a lot better today than I did then.
Yeah.
It's just a flesh
Just big
wound.
scab. The other thing, Doug, you were talking about it. We from that checkpoint, we bombed down to a road and took the road around. That was one of the things because she was like, I need to slow down a little bit. That spooked me or whatever. So that played into that decision. The other thing is if you looked at the map, the number of turns that you had to get right to get there wasn't a quick way to get from that, whatever that was, CP40 to Breck without making 1,000 little turns. So that was like, you know what? We kind of need the mental break. The roads looked like it could be just as fast. I know it was mostly downhill. And so, and that gave her the mental break away from to regroup and not.
Well, you guys had been on that road up there anyway, right? Because you were on that first leg.
Yep.
So going to the known, it's like what you did at Epic, where you go back to the known, where you know what it's going to be instead of the unknown. I think it was a smart decision. So when you got into that last TA, you guys transitioned pretty quick, right? Or did you take a break there?
Didn't take a break. We ate some food. They again, Jeff has great food at his TAs, and so I think they made me a couple eggs, and I think Andrea ate some stuff. But no, we wanted to get in and out fast. And so and they did warn us. They were like, "Hey, the guys are 4 hours in front of you," you know. So at that point, we knew it's like unless they make an error, we're not going to be able to catch them, because we knew that they were fast and they were high altitude guys, and we knew, like, literally sitting in Breck, you can see that mountain right there. That's where you're going, and you're like, "Holy crap!" Like, that's really far away. But again, it's a marathon, right? It was a long time. So yeah, we tried to get in and out as quick as we could, and that's where I lightened up my pack. I was like, I just, you know, what do I need for this 12 hours? That's all. You know, so it's less food and all this other stuff.
How was the navigation for those treks? I mean, most of it seemed pretty straightforward. There didn't seem to be a lot. I mean, other than that one kind of section in two, and the trek two that you did, how was the rest of the navigation?
Um, so I did some back of the envelope math, and so our my answer is going to be dependent on. So this year has had 218 days so far, roughly. I added up the number of hours of each race that at least I've done, and I've done a little bit more than Andrea's done. And this is not my time on the course. This is the actual race length, right? So sometimes I come in an hour early or whatever, but usually screeching to the second at the last minute. But basically, so far this year, I'm up to 508 hours of racing, which, if you divide that by the 218 days, I've spent 2.3 hours every single day of this year on a race course, usually navigating. And Andrea's been with me on most of these races. And so it's if we say the nav's hard, it's really, really, really hard. But most of the time, the nav's fairly straightforward. Also, Andrea and I have a really, we because it was just the two of us this time, when we didn't have other teammates that we're talking to, we had a really good thing where she would set the pace. She would be in front on the trek, and we're trying to move as fast as we can. So basically, she's kind of warning me about a log or a, you know, trip and fall and all of that. I can kind of keep her in my peripheral vision while I'm watching the maps. But I would basically call out what's going to happen in the future. You know, we're going to go north, and then it's going to turn west, and we're going to cross a reentrant. And then every once in a while, I'm like, yeah, we're going to be climbing. And then she's like, we're descending. Are you sure? You know, and then we look at the map and go, oh yeah, you're right. We need to go this way. So we had this really good communication cycle that really kept us on track. And if you notice, I mean, you were dot watching, like if we made a bobble, it was like 30 seconds in this direction and then back, and there we go. And that worked really well. But I do think it's because we spent so much time racing. I mean, not many teams are you know, love racing so much that they choose to do 6 per year. You know, that was our fifth big race, not counting the 24s and all the other little races. So
I think that goes into the communication that I think, you know, the people that are watching this that don't have the experience that you guys have for expedition racing, I think that is the biggest thing that I try to do with my teammates. I mean, most of the teammates that I've taken out have no experience in adventure racing, so I do all of the navigation. But I try to get everyone involved, because it's just like in anything else that you're doing for work or whatever. The more involved that your team is, the more that they feel like they're contributing to the team. And I take this from my wife. The very first adventure race that I did, I had no idea what I was doing. It was a virtual EX adventure race. And I was like, do you want to go out? She was like, yeah. So we went out, got lost, ended up finding some points, but not doing anything. And she was like, well, that wasn't very fun for me, because I just followed you around the whole time, because I wasn't communicating with her, right? Like, but you guys have such a unique communication because you have all this experience together. But I think that's what other racers need to be kind of working towards, right? Like, I try to make sure that I'm saying, look, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. This is what you should see. And it keeps them engaged. It keeps you engaged. It keeps you two together on the same page. And that did lead to what I saw was a flawless navigation race from you guys.
yeah,
So
the other
I
thing is
absolutely agree with you. And I feel like the one section where it was surprisingly difficult was at that ridge line. So at the last trek, when we you had to hike up basically the underneath of the chairlift. And it's still funny to me now because there were teams around us, and it was just hilarious how slow we were racing. You know, it's like one step in front of the other. It was so hot when we started that we took breaks every shade. Once we got to the pole, we got to the shade of the pole, we would stop for literally 60 seconds. Chip would time 60 seconds out. We would take 60 seconds and then we'd start back up again. And somehow at that pace, we were racing. And we got to the ridge line. But that's when, just short of the ridge line, a storm came through. We saw Type 2 Fun coming back down, and they had gotten 1 point and were coming back down. And this storm came through that just dropped 20 degrees, and there's hail that came along with it, just sidewards hail. And the sky got dark, and we're thinking, you know, what do we do? But it's moving fast. It just moved right by. Like I'm saying, you know, hail was maybe for a minute at the most. I mean, it just went so fast through. And then the sun came out again. So we got back up on the ridge thinking, oh, we're just looking for the fourth high point. You know, the map shows these little high points. So you think, oh, we're going to be able to see that. You know, it's just, we just have to count. No big deal. But we couldn't stay on top of the ridge line because we saw another storm coming. And we're thinking, well, what should we do here? We need to be in a position where we can go down if we absolutely need to. We shouldn't be the highest point on the mountain. And it got pretty serious. That slowed us down quite a lot. We decided at one point just to hold fast where we were, you know, get ready if we needed to, you know, get on top of our packs or something. Like if lightning had come, we needed to throw our stuff to the side and need to, you know, do what we need to do. So we're just kind of waiting, thinking it looked like the previous storm. So it looked like it was moving fast. We didn't see any thunder and lightning. So there must have been, I think we heard one thunderclap. But then it went by just as fast as the other one. And it just made me feel extremely lucky. You know, sometimes you don't have control over the environment or the situation, or no matter how much experience you have or don't have, you're on the top of a freaking mountain above the tree line. There is nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go fast. These are boulder fields that are at a steep angle that if you try to go down low fast, you're going to have a problem. So it just got pretty serious. You know, we're on the edge, we're not on the ridge. The storm goes by and we see another rainbow. So the first storm came by, we see a gorgeous rainbow. The second storm comes by, we see a gorgeous rainbow. And I think the second one meant even more to us because we were more exposed, and we were one of the only ones up there at the time. Chip and I were up there, and Troy was ahead of us. We got a glimpse of him a few times doing about the same thing we were doing, kind of skirting around the high points. But even from that vantage point, the high tops of these peaks were not obvious. And so while we were hunkered down, trying to figure out what to do, we were also trying to figure out where we were. Maybe Chip will talk more about it. There was a particular noticing the bigger features of the big bowl of what's beneath us. And it made us aware of exactly where we were. And we did know that another team had missed it and had thought they got to the high point and they didn't. So we were a little bit hyper aware. And if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, Chip's sharing a couple of pictures from it. But that was actually challenging navigation. And it was a type of navigation that we don't have a lot of practice with, only because you're looking at such huge features. So that was exciting. Anything to add to that, Chip?
Yeah, the hard part I thought was the you know, if you're right on the ridge, you're going up and down the peaks. It's very easy to count them. But these are 300-foot peaks, and it's like, this doesn't make any sense. We're going to traverse around, and there's these storms, so we don't want to be directly on top. But as you're traversing, since it's kind of a curve, you lose track of, you can't see the peak. Right. So then you're like, well, were there two up there or one? And it's 400 feet up or whatever. So, and as you can see, I don't know if for those of you watching, you can see in the photos, like it's just boulder fields, but it's gradual. So that's when the storm came, we had to get off the peak, and we kind of got in a little crevice, and we're sitting there and there's freezing rain and it's cold, and we're like, we know we have to clear the course, we have to get the point, but do we really want to go for up and stick our heads up while there's a storm coming? So yeah, like Andrea said, we sat there, and luckily we had this beautiful view, and we're kind of looking at the terrain features, the big terrain features, and we're like, wow, okay, this is that and this is that. So now we know exactly where we are. We got to go one more peak over. So I could see why some teams had a problem finding it, but these I guess this photo is a good example. These are just big rock piles. It's basically like there's almost no dirt and grass. The peaks were just a pile of rocks, and all every other one is wonky and wobbly and all of that. So it's very slow going. And we had these big snow fields. You had to choose to go above or below the snow field. And then, like, as you're walking and the rocks fall, they get on the snow and they slide all the way down. You're like, that could have been me. Like that, it's so steep that you're going to slide down to this thing, and then it spits you out the bottom going 20 miles an hour into another rock pile. So it was tough, but the views were like, this is just unbelievable. Like everywhere you look, you see these mountains and these huge storms, and you can see the hail hitting the town below. And just for me, it was just very much a highlight of the race was this peak, or this traverse across the ridge line.
And you guys got done with that and only had probably about 14 miles left to trek. You had to go out and get a point closer to Frisco, and then come back down to the TA and get a couple points. At that point, how were you feeling? Did you know that you were in a solid second?
Pretty much. Yeah. I think we knew we had blown past Cosmic, and we were moving, other than being stuck on the peak for an hour. We were moving pretty fast. I knew if we could run it in, I started putting my self-imposed goal. I was like, I think we can be in by midnight as long as we keep moving fast. And Troy being with us was good. Like we told him we wanted to run. He's like, I can run. This sounds good. So he was able to run. He was also he was quiet at first, and then he started kind of picking up on our navigation. And going back to it, the more experienced you get, you use all of your tools and everything at hand. So it didn't matter if it was altitude. Like we would be resetting our altimeters every hour or something like that. We were listening for things like rivers. Like we should have a river on our left. As soon as you start hearing the river, our turn's coming up. So we were listening for stuff. We were looking at the compass constantly. We were counting turns. We knew it's like, we just need to get in fast, and we need to not make any errors. And we're going to lock up second, or first, in case the guys flamed out somewhere. But we just assumed they weren't going to flame out, because they obviously were proficient. And so it was funny. We were just moving really fast. Troy fit right in perfectly. It was like, I'd say, okay, we're at this and we're turning here. And he's like, I concur, let's go. And then, of course, having a third man, like when we're going in on a checkpoint, we could spread out a little bit and go in formation and pop it. And it was like, it was just a matter of executing. We had no problems. It was just like, let's get to the finish. Now, getting out. It's so funny. Adventure racers, we can move fast through this wonky terrain and navigation and bushwhacking and getting scratched. And we had cut through some, cut some squiggles and went through the bush. And then we get on that damn bike path from going back up to the TA. Talk about miserable. Like anything that's like flat and boring. It's like, oh, like Andrea was like so fast coming all the way down. And the minute we hit that bike lane, just all of her power dropped, and she's like, nope, not running. No, this sucks. But I really wanted to get there by midnight, so we ran like the last mile or two to get in by the deadline.
Yeah, it was awesome. I'd slept a few hours, and I was scheduled to take my next pain med at midnight. So like I had set an alarm to like wake up so I could take it, because at that point I had to stay on my pain meds. And so I was like, oh, so I was texting with Megan, and she was one of the volunteers. I was like, please, if you can get photos for me or a video of them or something. And so she was awesome and got the photos and video that I posted. So just seeing, like, you guys came across with smiles on your faces. And, a lot of people are like, man, how can you be thinking that after just going for 64 hours through crazy high terrain? And, obviously you're getting the views that you were getting. And
I grew up in Colorado, and I was not an athletic person in my youth. I lived there until I went to college, and then I just did all of the things that you're supposed to do. Like, I was following the recipe for success. Like a lot of people, it makes them happy. I got married, I had kids, I was a stay-at-home mom. I got all of the things that I thought I wanted, and I didn't feel happy. So I got divorced. I just went through a lot of change. And so I feel like during that time, I started to find my true self. And it led me to the person I am right now. I love being outdoors. I love challenging myself. And I had taken all of that time for granted that I lived in Colorado. Every time I go back home, I am usually, with my family. I love visiting them, but we spend a lot of time indoors talking and eating and all those fun things. But I go back to Colorado, and then I come back home wishing I had more time to do the things that really fill my soul. So this time I got to come back to Colorado. I spent a good deal of time in the mountains. We were in the wild and doing all the things I love to do. And it just felt full circle. I felt like I've arrived, I just felt close to the people in my life that aren't there anymore. My dad loved the mountains, and we had gotten to visit where his ashes were. So I just felt really close to him and nature, and it just felt so fulfilling. So to cross the finish line, it was just really, really exciting. So that's how that felt. What about you, Chip?
And
How'd it feel?
on all of these expeditions, it's such a different sport than just like a 24-hour race. It's like I think you got to get past really, I don't even think it's 48 hours. I really think it's like 50 or 60 hours in, and you just, I say that this is where I feel most alive. Like, it's just like everything's clicking. You have a focus. You're like Andrea said, you're appreciating the beauty of nature. You're out there without people and traffic and stores and all the normal crap. It's like, this is real life. This is real, what humans were designed for. It's like running through the woods and chasing CPs and catching food or whatever. And so every time I get to the finish line, I'm almost in tears. So I don't want it to end. Like, I know, like Doug, you're saying, like, some people are like, oh my God, I can't wait till the finish. Like, I get to the end and I'm refreshed and I want to go back out. I was actually bummed in this one. I was like, it's only 64 hours. Like, we need, we could still be out there for another 8 hours or whatever. This sucks. Why do we end this quick? And I always can't wait till the next race. But another thing that I think, I don't know if everybody knows, but Andrea and I are scheduled to do the World Championships in Africa. We did Paraguay last year. That was a 7-day race, and Africa this year is 10 days. So the idea is that we need to be able to end a 64-hour race ready to go on the next leg, right? If we were torched after 64 hours, even though we were moving pretty fast, it wouldn't be a good thing if we're going into a 10-day. So I was impressed that both of our training and everything, we got to the end, and we had 0 blisters. She had her little scratch on her lip from the face plant, but our nutrition was dialed. We didn't have any tummy problems. We didn't have any altitude problems. We didn't have any feet problems.
The storms that hit you guys on the ridge line can hit at any point where you're at right now and mess up. But yeah, look, I think what a lot of people love about you guys is you're approachable. You are an inspiration to people because of the fact that, like, you're not these young guys like, Boo Boo, that are going out there, and you're showing people that it doesn't matter what you did in your youth. It doesn't matter what you did 5 years ago. If you want to get out and do these adventures, there's nothing that should be stopping you. That's what I really appreciate about you guys. Your approachability is something that I have loved from the minute that I've met you. And I hope that maybe in the future, once I rehab myself, that I will get a chance to race with you guys, and not just on a separate team, but maybe you'll let me slow you down a little bit. Um, but it was an absolute pleasure to watch you guys during this race and get to kind of be your voice for a couple of days while you were out there. I hope that everyone enjoyed it as much as I did, because it really it got me through that first few days after surgery. And so I appreciate it. If you ever need insight again, I know I talked to your dad on Facebook through the messages, and it was great being able to answer questions. And I don't even have the experience that you guys have with expedition races, but in just learning and hearing and being able to know kind of what goes into it, I was able to give at least an educated finding of what I was seeing. So I hope that you guys enjoyed it when you got back and read it. And I look forward to being able to be on a race course with you, hopefully at C2C in February.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Doug. When I went back to read your commentary, I was thinking that you were reading our minds. I mean, you were very good at it. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope we see you at the C2C. And I can't thank you enough for your compliments. It really means a lot to us. So thank you so much. I hope you get feeling better soon.
Me too. It's still painful, but hopefully, this couple weeks that I'm going through this will lead to not having pain out on course and having a more stable platform to be able to push forward in these races. So, thank you guys. You guys did an amazing job. I know that your fans were loving watching what you were doing, and so keep it up. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.
Thank you so much.
That's good. Thank you, Doug.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please take a moment to leave a rating and a comment.
If you have a question for the next mailbag segment, call 757-354-4795 and leave us a voicemail or a text with your name, city you are calling from, and your question.
To find additional content, including the video versions of these discussions, you can search for thisABILITY Racing on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
We hope this podcast inspired you to focus on your abilities and plan your next adventure.
See you on the trail.